This is Docs Outside the Box, episode 32.
Welcome to Docs Outside the Box podcast. This is your official show, looking inside the minds of cutting-edge and innovative doctors. Think you'll find these stories in any medical textbook? Sorry. You're getting real life insight from men and women pushing the envelope beyond medicine. Ordinary doctors doing extraordinary things. Let's start now with your host, Dr. Nee Darko.
This episode is brought to you by Set for Life Insurance. Protect yourself against life setbacks with Set for Life Insurance. Set for Life Insurance gets you disability and life insurance at a reduced cost with their exclusive discounts. Now that's why I use them. Visit www.setforlifeinsurance.com and tell them Dr. Darko sent you. What's good, everyone? This is the Doc Outside the Box, Dr. Nee Darko, host of Docs Outside the Box podcast. Often imitated, never duplicated. And this is a podcast where I'm bringing stories of ordinary doctors doing extraordinary things, all in an effort to inspire docs like you. That's right, those who are listening, you who's listening right now, to live outside the box. And before we get into our next episode, I got to read a 5-star review off of Apple Podcasts. Once again, everyone, thank you very much for leaving me reviews on Apple Podcasts. This one is from Become Unlimited, and it's titled The Podcast for Anyone Who Wants to Be More Successful, and it's 5 stars. Thank you very much. And it says, it doesn't matter if you're a doctor, physician assistant, teacher, accountant, or businessman. You will find something in this podcast that will make you more successful. From daily motivation to taking strides toward financial stability, success, this podcast covers it all. Thank you, Dr. Nee Darko, for producing excellence. Continue to knock it out of the park. Well, I don't even know if you're a doctor, but Become Unlimited, thank you very much for leaving me that review. I really appreciate it. I'm glad that you're a listener. I'm glad that you took a moment out to leave a review, particularly a 5-star review. And as you all know, I will read reviews that are less than 5 stars. I will put out and read reviews that are 5 stars. You can't go more than 5. But like I said, Apple Podcasts and other reviews are very important because they help the show to move up the rankings, and they help the show to become that much more viewable to new users. And obviously the show will continue to grow that way. But let's get on with the show. So our next guest is going to talk about things to do when you've kind of maxed out your current stock market portfolio. And I'm talking about stocks and bonds and, ways in which you can get yourself to be a little bit more diversified and almost hedge your bets when downturns occur. So most studies show that the market is going to crash or hit a downturn about every 8 years, which means actually right now we are probably due. We're actually overdue for a crash, right? The last crash was 2008. It's 2017, almost 2018, so we're a little bit overdue. My next guest is Dr. Kenyon Meadows, who's a practicing radiation oncologist, and he actually says he has a lot to say about this situation. So he says, obviously, that we can't do anything about market crashes that occur, right? Particularly market crashes that occur when you're in your 70s, and then you have to end up pushing your retirement further into your 70s, which can be a very difficult situation, which is what he saw with colleagues. Obviously being as diversified as possible is helpful, but he talks about ways in which you can hedge your bets by investing in things such as alternative assets. Now, alternative assets are things like peer-to-peer lending, which is very big right now, real estate, student loan investing. These are just things just to name a few, but these are the things that he's talking about. Sometimes some people may even say alternative assets are things like, collectibles, collecting artwork, wine, whatever is considered valuable. That is not, specifically stocks and bonds. That's an alternative asset. But he is the author of the book, Alternative Financial Medicine, High Yield Investing in a Low Yield World. And he has been making the podcast rounds. He's been making, rounds on different various media. And I thought that his story, as well as what he talks about, is something that you all can learn about. Okay. He's been featured in numerous media, including MSN Money, Alternative Investment Coach, as well as the very famous, the very popular podcast, particularly among real estate investors, Bigger Pocket podcast. So just a brief background on Dr. Meadows. He is originally from Youngstown, Ohio. He went to college and medical school at the prestigious Case Western University, and then decided to go down south to University of Florida and complete a residency in radiation oncology. And currently right now, he's been practicing for some time in Georgia. So things that we are going to talk about in this episode are, one, what's an alternative asset? Other things that we're going to talk about are his top 2 tips for success with online crowdfunding sites, such as peer-to-peer lending sites and other crowdfunding real estate sites, which are really big right now. You're going to learn what peer-to-peer lending is. And then I'm going to get a chance to ask him a tough question where I take him through a scenario and he gives his advice to a newly minted general surgeon who has literally about $200,000 in student loan debt, but has a pretty good salary. And I want to hear what his advice is for this newly minted surgeon, if he would suggest to him or her if they should still do alternative investing and alternative assets. He also gives some advice to pre-med students, which I think is always valuable. And always at the end, he's going to answer hashtag I'm not just a doc. So without further ado, let's get on with the interview. We are back live and direct with another episode of Docs Outside the Box. Today I got Dr. Kenyon Meadows, MD, author of Alternative Financial Medicine, High Yield Investing in a Low Yield World. Dr. Meadows, what's up? Welcome to the show.
Oh, thanks for having me on, Nee.
Hey, man, it's good to have you on. I know you've been making the podcast kind of roundup, and you've been pushing your book and pushing everything that you are all about, and I'm excited to have you on the show. So, hey, look, before we get started on the nitty gritty, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? For example, like tell us what med school you went to, the residency, and so forth.
Okay, well, sure. I grew up in Northeast Ohio. Go Cavs, Youngstown, Ohio.
They're about to get swept.
I know. And I went to undergrad and med school at Case Western.
Okay, all right.
And then did residency in radiation oncology down at University of Florida, Gainesville. And after a brief stint, first job in Alabama, have been over in Southeast Georgia, St. Simon's Island area for the last 8 years.
Dang. I've never heard of that. Where exactly is that? Is that like Tybee Island or something like that, or am I way off?
Well, not too far off.
Okay.
The easiest thing I tell people is, you're on I-95 there along the coast, and you got Savannah and you got Jacksonville, Florida, and we're like dead in between there on the coast. Mm-hmm.
Okay, I got you. Mm-hmm. So you practice radiation oncology?
Correct.
Taking care of cancer patients. That's what's up.
Yep.
Okay.
Yes, indeed.
Now, are you practicing full time?
I am
Okay.
practicing full time.
Okay. Now, the reason why I wanted you on the show, the reason why, you're here is, on Docs Outside the Box, we talk about stories. We try to inspire the audience on various things. The biggest thing is, the things that you're doing outside of clinical medicine. Obviously, with you, the big thing is alternative assets. So can you tell us exactly what does alternative assets mean?
Yeah, well, it's a very broad term. So alternative assets really are anything other than traditional investments like stocks, bonds, mutual funds, CDs, money markets, the kind of things I think that we've all been exposed to.
Right.
So consequently, it can range from anything from real estate to collectibles to wine. I mean, so it's a very, very broad term.
Okay. All right. So when you say real estate, you're talking about like actually owning property and renting it out. Is that what you mean?
Well, yes. I mean, I think that's conceptually, I think most people can kind of understand that, although there's many other ways to participate in real estate other than owning physical property. And I actually have gravitated to some of those other methods because they're less time intensive. And they can still, provide a nice return. Things like, real estate crowdfunding or investing in mortgage notes, things of that nature.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Okay. All right. Now, look, I mean, you're a radiation oncologist. You're busy. You practice full time.
Mm-hmm.
And look, we all know nobody gets any type of training on alternative assets, obviously, and definitely not on traditional stocks and bonds and index funds, all that stuff. How did you get into all of this stuff? Tell us about that.
Yeah, so I mean, up until a few years ago, I think I would describe myself as a pretty typical type of investor, meaning, I did the 401k and the retirement account type thing, and then with a lot of the other discretionary money that I had, I invested in things like mutual funds and some individual stocks and everything, and didn't have a particular interest in financial education or investing, above and beyond that. And then, honestly, the 2008 market downturn happened, and I saw just how that affected me, seeing how much, wealth and money just sort of evaporate pretty quickly. Right. So that had
that's got to be painful, man. I'm not laughing. I'm just like,
Right.
It has got to be painful because I started investing afterwards. But I
Right,
got to imagine what it's like for people like you or people who are in their 50s or 60s and they are, banking on this money being there and it's no longer there. And I think because of that, so many people, particularly in my generation and younger than that, they're scared to invest,
Well, you mentioned you mentioned 50s and 60s. Well, how about in their 70s? And this is actually one of the little anecdotes I include in the book. And this was a very inspirational moment. So I ran into a colleague, mentor, really more of a mentor, sort of father figure to me. He was in his early 70s and a general surgeon. And I ran into him in 2010. And he informed me that he had planned on retiring in '08. But because of the market downturn, and he had been putting money in for years and years, so it cost him a lot of money to the point where he wound up pushing his retirement back a little bit to let the market recover. So that was a huge thing for me right there to kind of put a person to it in terms of like, hey, the stock market's great. We know it's a vehicle for long-term wealth, but we know it occasionally is going to have these really bad downturns. And, when you look at the one we had in '01, after the tech bubble, and then you factor in the one you had in '08, two relatively close like that, from 2000 to 2010, the stock market was really pretty flat in terms of your actual returns for a full decade,
Okay.
And so, that was like, there's got to be something else I can do besides just the stock market. I'm still going to participate in here, but what are some other things?
So you don't want to put it on the end of your bed? Nothing like that? That don't work?
No. Oh, man. So that's another thing too, right? So the subtitle of the book is High Yield Investing in a Low Yield World.
Right.
We know that, we've had close to a decade now of really, really low interest rates. And so it's been hard to get any return on your money. And with inflation being, usually 2-3%, yeah, man, put it underneath your mattress. It is shrinking. That's a recipe for shrinkage.
And even in certain banks, right? I mean, if these money market accounts or even just regular savings accounts with, percentages 0.0, I mean, you're losing money compared to inflation, right?
Exactly.
Okay.
So yeah, so you got to do something with it. And so, as usual, when you take on a new thing in life where you're really going to devote some time and attention to it, it's coming from a place of pain, right? So that's what really motivated me to start learning about some other things, and that led me into all this whole world of alternative assets.
Okay, so what was your first foray into this? So let me just, before we even get into alternative investing, so basically you already got a 401k at this point, right?
Yeah.
Okay, what about your student loan debt? How are you doing with that at that point?
Yeah, student loan debt, I really tackled that pretty aggressively after residency. So I had a nice amount, but I really lived below my means for 3 years or so out of residency.
Righteous. I know about that life.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Apartment living and just taking that extra money and squirreling it away towards that debt.
Ramen noodle life.
Yeah, man, on an attending salary, but I was used to it, so it wasn't that big a deal.
Right. So basically, you had all the traditional things kind of taken care of. You had like a good emergency fund. You had, I guess a majority of your student loans paid down, and you had 401k savings that you were going towards. So now you're talking about what was the first foray into alternative type of investing now?
Yeah, the very first foray was private mortgage lending. Okay, and I basically began to ask around my social circle, anybody I could think of, hey, how do you invest your money outside the stock market? How do you invest your money? So making the rounds, and I finally ran into a gentleman I met actually through church who mentioned that, hey, I provide private funding for people who want to flip houses. And, they will pay, 12, 15% short-term interest on that kind of money. And you also have the security of being the lien holder on that project, that house flip project. And he's like, it's a nice way to, earn a nice attractive rate of interest and be protected while the house is being flipped. And so that was actually my very first alternative investment. I got in with his people that flipped houses, and these are real pros. These are people that are doing, 30, 40 flips a year. And, they got it down almost like a science. And so they're very reliable. And, once I learned about, hey, what's a typical loan term? What's the paperwork? What do you look for in a person to handle a rehab and all that? So that was the very first thing.
How'd you do financially with that?
Very, very good. So like, as I mentioned, the returns on that can easily be, double digit type returns. And you typically structure it as a monthly interest only payment while the project is getting rehabbed and everything. And then once it sells, you get your initial capital back. And if there's any, go ahead.
So this is something that you are directly in a relationship with somebody who is trying to flip a house. Like, you are making a contract directly with them, or were you going through a third party or mediator?
Actually, directly one-on-one kind of deal.
Okay.
Yes.
All right.
So, and that's a point I should bring up. That took a little bit of a time investment in terms of number one, learning about this, and then number two, really vetting the person that you're going to be a financial partner with. Okay. And that's the part that can get a little tricky with, how busy physicians are and everything. That's the rub, is the time and honestly the interest to do it. But I was motivated too, and it's been a very good long-term partnership.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
And then, so after you went from private mortgage lending, after you shored that up, and you're still doing that currently right now?
That's correct. Yes. Okay.
What was the next step after that? Or what was the next set of assets you went into after that?
Well, as sort of luck or timing would have it, so that was back in 2013 when I started doing the private mortgage lending. And that was also about the time when some of the first real estate crowdfunding sites really began to gain any sort of profile. And a lot of real estate crowdfunding is essentially private mortgage lending, but in an online format where you can participate in doing these types of loans with much smaller amounts of money. And since I've been doing it in the offline world, it was a natural no-brainer for me to try out some of these crowdfunding sites. So as it turns out, I've been an early adopter on those sites and have done dozens of projects there as well.
So I know obviously none of them are sponsoring this show. If you if you guys want to sponsor the show, contact me. But can you name some? Can you name some of these websites or some of the companies that you are working with online?
Yeah, absolutely. Realty Shares is the one that I've done the most volume with.
Okay.
There's Patch of Land is another very prominent one, and Realty Mogul. Those are at least three. I'm on about 10 different sites, but those are the three that I think I've been on the longest, and they're kind of industry leaders in terms of size and number of projects that they've done.
So in that realm, are you basically in a sense, you're giving money to the company, they're showing you a project, and you and a bunch of other internet users are basically putting in all of your money into one project. In a sense, does that decrease the risk?
Yeah, so one of the barriers to physicians doing private mortgage lending is, number one, finding an individual person out in the quote unquote real world to work with. And then number two, physicians make good income and everything, you have to be willing to write a check for, high five figures, six figures to provide the funding on a typical house flip. So there's a big capital commitment.
Sure.
So the real estate crowdfunding is nice in that, the minimums to participate are much, much less, $1,000, $5,000, and you can spread that out amongst multiple projects. So I think it's kind of a tailor-made asset class for high net worth individuals that want some exposure to private lending, but they have some, want some convenience to it as well.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
And how have the returns been within that realm?
Very comparable. In the earlier years, when there weren't as many people, weren't as many investors, the platforms were offering more generous interest rates, sometimes in the 14% range, to get people to participate. And as more and more people have gotten comfortable with it, and they have more investors willing to do it, the interest rates have come down a bit, but you can still get 9 to 11% easily on your money.
That's better than my savings account right now.
Oh, most definitely. Most definitely.
And are we talking about this on like a yearly basis, or are we talking about this like over a certain amount of years? Like,
well, so there's two flavors of projects on there. There is equity, right, where you actually could buy a fractional piece of ownership, typically in a multifamily like apartment building or some other kind of commercial project. Now, the time horizons for those are multiple years. You're expected to be a partial owner, and I haven't done that. I've stuck strictly with debt deals, and because that's what I was doing, before crowdfunding came along. So the debt deals are very typically like 6 to 18 month durations, and again, these are like fix and flip type projects. So they're by their very nature, they're short term. So those returns that I'm quoting are on an annual basis. And again, say for instance, say you put $10,000 on a project and it pays 12%. So you would get like $100 a month ACH into your account, every month like clockwork. And then when the project completes and it finishes and sells, you get your 10 grand back.
Sign me up.
Yeah, exactly.
So before I start asking you about your book, I just want to ask you a quick question. So for those who are listening to the show, those who are saying, hey, look, this sounds like this is for me. I want to go to so-and-so website and I want to crowdfund within the real estate world. What are some tips that you have for people? Give me like your top 2 tips that you think people should be looking for to find like the right project where you think they're going to maximize the likelihood of them getting a good return.
Well, one of the things that you're dependent on is basically the underwriting or due diligence of the platform in terms of vetting the people on the other side that are bringing the deals there. Now, one of the things that all of the platforms harp on is the fact that, hey, if you see a deal listed on here to invest in, trust me, we've gone over this thing with a fine-tooth comb. The people the entrepreneurs who are doing these projects, they have to have a long track record. They can't just being on a crowdfund platform can't be their first or second deal. We gotta have looked them over, and they gotta have several successful deals in the past. So that's number one. Number two, I tend to go with the platforms that have been around the longest, and this is a relatively new asset class. But you can see some of the platforms that I named. They've been in the game already for at least 3 to 4 years, which is about as long as you can be in it. And you can see the platform's track record. Like, hey, we've done 90 deals to this point, and we've only had like one go bad. That kind of deal. So I'm certainly want to more gravitate towards those platforms that have those types of track records. And then number two, and then number three, the last thing is, whenever there are projects that are in particularly, really hot markets where, the real estate prices are, honestly a little insane.
Miami, San Francisco, New York.
Exactly. So
you like that New York accent at the end?
So I love San Francisco, Brooklyn, places where, the prices are really high.
The Wild West, man.
And there's going to be a market for somebody to buy that. So whenever I see a project in a place like that, I tend to gravitate towards that too.
Got you. Now, your book, it's called Alternative Financial Medicine, High Yield Investing in the Low Yield World. So it came out this year. Am I correct? Came out on February 2017.
Yes.
What prompted you to write this book?
Well, basically, evangelizing people kind of one-on-one and trying to, tell colleagues, associates about some of the stuff that I was in, there was some genuine interest. And I said, well, maybe I should write a book about this. I think that'd be a way to potentially, get the word out. Be seen as a little bit of an authority to it. And honestly, a little bit of a bucket list thing in general for me to write a book, just for that general life accomplishment thing. So those are the big factors. Yeah.
No, I got to admit, I haven't read the book myself, but it is on my list. It's on my Kindle list on Amazon for me to read. So I'm looking forward to reading it.
Yeah.
But definitely on one of the intros it talks about is peer-to-peer lending and peer-to-business lending. And can you talk more about what exactly is peer-to-peer lending? Like, explain that to us, because I'm having a hard time understanding. I'm trying to figure out how is it that you're going to make money from that?
Right. So a big chunk of the book is basically on what we call alternative online lending, and there's three main flavors of it. There's the real estate piece that we just covered, and then there's business lending, and then there's essentially consumer lending. Okay, and that's what peer-to-peer is. So to draw parallels from the real estate world, the peer-to-peer platforms, they're trying to find investors who got some extra capital they want to deploy. And on the other end of it, instead of a real estate project, it's usually somebody who's got some high interest credit card debt that they're looking to refinance down. So when you look at it,
you actually see this on the website? Like, they tell you this is the description of the person, or?
Correct. You can see that person. You can see that person's credit score. You can see that person's income. You can see whether they own their home or not. You can, and basically, what most of them are looking to do, about 70% of the peer-to-peer loan volume, again, what you're doing, you're refinancing out somebody's credit card debt. So the average credit card interest rate in this country is about 17 to 18%, right? And then you and me, we've got money sitting in our savings account earning 1%. Right. So when you look at that, that's a tremendous kind of arbitrage between the two, right? So what the peer-to-peer sites do is say, look, what if we could offer you like 7 to 10% on your money as a return to the investor, and then at the same time bring down that 17, 18% for the credit card person down to 9% and save them a bunch of money. That's what peer-to-peer lending is in essence.
Gotcha.
Okay?
And now I'm assuming I'm assuming the yield is high or the interest is high mainly because the risk is high.
Well, yeah, so ultimately these are unsecured loans, okay?
Okay, all right.
And so, you have that default risk. So what the platform does is, if you want to, you can get very granular and look at all the individual people you want to lend to and scrutinize their credit scores and income and all that kind of stuff. But the platform, what they do is they look at all that stuff and they basically assign a letter grade to that person representing their credit risk on I think it's actually an A through G schedule. And so so you can get even worse than an F. So the A rated people, they get the lower interest rates, and then the G rated people, they get the higher interest rates. But people's appetite for risk varies tremendously, and I know people that invest in the highest risk loans, and I know people who invest in the lowest. And I tend to stay kind of more toward the lower risk. But yeah, I've been doing that for I think about 3 years or so on the peer to peer, and with returns of about 7 to 8% over that time.
So overall, like I'm listening to all the different options that you're giving me, like from real estate, crowdfunding. It's a smorgasbord, but it just consistently sounds like you're winning with that in comparison to traditional investing. Is there a situation where you would tell someone like, look, you may want to just go the alternative route as compared to the traditional route, or is it always just kind of shore up everything traditionally and then kind of move on if you want to into the alternative route?
Yeah, I mean, for me, the alternative route in general is going to be actually where the bulk of like my discretionary money is going to go. But I should clarify that in that out of all the different things that I'm doing, the physical ownership of rental property is actually, it's kind of the cornerstone of everything, because ultimately the online stuff, while it's worked out great, and I think that it's going to continue to do very well as these asset classes mature and kind of get into people's consciousness. You can't replace, in my mind, from a risk and return standpoint, actually owning the asset, yourself.
Right.
So rental property is the bedrock of everything, but the private mortgage lending, the offline private mortgage lending, as it were, that's kind of the second biggest thing. And then all the alternative lending that's online based, it's a nice, chunk as well, but it's never going to be the cornerstone because, I think that it is risky. But I've been doing it for a few years now, and I've been pretty pleased with the way things have worked out.
Since you brought up risk,
yeah,
you stepped into it. So
yeah,
I'm going to ask you, what are some big mistakes that you see people make? Give us, like, I don't know, if you can, the top 3 mistakes you see people make when they get into alternative investing.
Well, it's kind of that's a big question. So on the online stuff, you've got to be very, very diversified, meaning the amount of money that you put in any one particular deal, I would actually stick with the investment minimums. Okay. Say for instance, on a crowdfund deal, that might be $1,000 to $5,000. On a peer-to-peer lending situation, the platform is very explicit, like, hey, $25 to any individual person. So even if you've got like, a few thousand you want to deploy, do it over several hundred loans. And there's enough volume on the platform to do that. And they make it really easy to do. So I would never get overly concentrated when it comes to an online lending platform. Number one. Okay. Mm-hmm. And then number 2, I think you ought to be pretty knowledgeable about things, meaning, say for instance, well, what's going to happen on a crowdfunding deal that goes bad? Okay. Do you know about what the foreclosure and recovery process, like, what does it look like? How long does it take? How likely are you to get your money back? I think you need to be keenly aware of what the risks are and how the process is going to play out when a deal doesn't go so well. So, and just to put a number on it, I've done like 36 real estate crowdfunding deals thus far, and 3 of them are in some various stage of the foreclosure process. So I knew that was a possibility, but I also know that it's actually a pretty high probability that we'll get the money back, but it's just going to take a process for these guys to repossess it and sell it and all that kind of stuff.
So 3 out of 36, that's not bad though.
No, it's not bad at all. It's actually not bad at all. And again, when you're the first position lender, meaning like you have the senior lien or senior claim on the asset, the recovery rate is actually really, really high in real estate. So, I'm very confident that I will get my money back. It's just going to take a little time, and you got to know that kind of stuff going in.
Got you.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, I want to throw a scenario at you. You game?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. I want to know what you would do in this situation. So let's take, for example, you got a 32-year-old female. Let's keep it medical. She's status post. Some shop talk. She's status post graduating from a general surgery residency, right? She's got $200K in debt, which is probably a little low compared to what people are actually graduating with, right? Mm-hmm. That debt is between, let's just say, 5 to 9% interest, right? Mm-hmm. She's got a job that's going to be paying her, coming out of residency, $350,000. She doesn't have any retirement savings. And she's scared of the stock market, so she doesn't have any. She doesn't have a Roth IRA. She has no savings whatsoever, and she's literally putting her money, stashing her money in let's just say a regular bank account, making less than inflation. Let's leave it at that. Mm-hmm. Now, if you had this female right in front of you, this general surgery right in front of you, would you recommend her getting into alternative assets? If not, what kind of recommendations would you make for her?
Yeah, well, and actually, in terms of like your actual numbers, these actually aren't that dissimilar from my status coming out of training a decade ago. I had about 187 in loan debt back then. And yeah, I think I had rates as high as 8%. So I'll tell you what I did, and then I'll tell you what I would do now, having learned a lot more.
All right, cool.
So what I did was attack the student loan debt, and I think I contributed. I was an employed doc, so I contributed the max to the 401k and got the employer matched and that kind of thing. So I did do that, okay. And pretty much everything else was a vigorous payment toward the student loan debt. And I wasn't scared of the stock market, but I just made the conscious decision that I wasn't going to invest traditional assets or alternative assets. It was all about debt retirement. Now, What I would do now, okay, is I would engage one of these alternative lenders, not as an investor, but as a potential client, such as a company like SoFi or Common Bond or something like that. And I would have them refinance my student loan debt using investors like myself to do it, and get all of my student loan debt at 5% or less. And I actually would pay on that at a more relaxed, leisurely pace once I refinanced it down. I would take then that money and I would do the 401k, but in actuality, any extra money that I had, I actually would start to contribute to trying to buy some physical rental property or do some private lending. Actually,
really,
I actually would, yes,
really?
Because if I can get my student loan debt at 5% and I can make 12% or something like that, I would do that, actually, and leisurely pay off the student loan debt and start to accumulate like some assets and experience with the alternative investing. If I started doing that back then, I'd be, I'd actually be, much further along.
Dang, I thought I had you stumped on that question. I was like, I got him on this one. I bet you not going to say.
No. And honestly,
okay.
and I know that answer, may not be what a lot of people would expect. But one thing I've come to appreciate from talking to a lot of people, folks' appetite for risk, their comfort level with carrying large amounts of debt and everything, it's all variable, right? And one of the things that I found, though, from talking to a lot of very wealthy individuals outside of medicine that are much wealthier than any practicing doctor will ever be, they are comfortable carrying debt that's performing. Very comfortable. And I just that's a mindset change for, I think, a lot of us.
Well, that's the reason why you're on Docs Outside the Box, because obviously you're not comfortable being in the traditional format. So I appreciate you giving us that answer. It's very honest and it's true, and I really appreciate that answer. Now, if we had, let's take an opportunity to kind of pivot a little bit and take maybe more of a 30,000-foot view on you, Dr. Meadows. So let me ask you a question. What do you find more rewarding? Do you find, being a doctor or being an investor? What do you find more rewarding? And be honest, please.
Yeah, I came into this out of trying to solve a problem, right? And the problem wasn't dissatisfaction with my job, right? So
okay.
I really enjoy being a physician, and I intend to be that, in a full-time capacity going forward. The thing that I find most enjoyable about the investing piece of things is that, on honesty, it's kind of a peace of mind kind of thing, meaning that if for whatever reason, something happened on the job front or my attitude did change and I wanted to step away from it and whatnot, like I have something else that I know could really, number one, at least pay the bills and is interesting and consume my time and that kind of thing. So it's kind of more of a peace of mind kind of thing. I don't find myself so worried about things anymore. So that's been the most enjoyable thing about learning about this this finance and investing piece. It's actually been kind of liberating and it's actually lowered my sort of overall stress level,
Okay, that's what's up. I like that answer. That's a really good answer.
Mm-hmm.
So your work outside of clinical medicine, let's say how much you actually earn from what you're doing and what you're making outside of clinical medicine. Is there any comparison to actually what you're doing traditionally, what you're doing in the hospital?
Well, I would describe it as a significant supplement at this point. Okay.
Okay.
It's the kind of thing that, like if I had to live on it, say for instance, like it wouldn't be bad, but it would certainly be not a replacement for my current medical income. And over time, though, I do want it to continue to grow, and so so maybe one day it can supplant that. And honestly, if I had more time, which is always the most precious commodity, I can make that happen a little more rapidly. But I'm content to keep it as a side vocation.
Got you. Mm-hmm. Well, we're getting towards the end of the interview, and I just want to throw at you some really quick, fast questions. You don't have to think much about it; just what comes off the top of the dome piece. You game?
Yeah, absolutely.
Ready to do this? Let's do this. All right. So, what's one thing you want listeners to get from this podcast?
I want them to know that it's possible to get a great feeling of liberation through financial education. It's possible, and that you never have to settle for low, uncertain returns.
Love it. What can the audience expect from you in the next 5 years?
They can expect for me to continue to put out content and try to educate folks with alternative assets, and to continue to grow and explore other ones besides the ones that I've mentioned in the book.
Okay. So listen, this is a little bit different, but I heard on Bigger Pockets. Is this true, man? Did you used to rock a Gumby?
I did. I came of age during the time, like Bobby Brown was really big back in the day.
Every little step he takes.
Exactly, right. Man. So, yeah, man.
So wait, did you watch that New Edition special on BET?
Yes, I did.
Man, you should send me the picture of you rocking a Gumby. I'll put it on the podcast picture.
I'll never do that. No way.
Well, look, knowing what you know now, what advice would you have given yourself or given to yourself as a pre-med student?
Pick a career in medicine that you truly love. Although be mindful of the fact that your time commitment and other interests in your life will blossom. Well, actually, let me say that differently. Pick something that you love, recognizing that down the road there may be some other things that you want to do, and picking a specialty that allows you to have a little bit of flexibility in that regard can be very helpful.
I think that answer is so true. I think some people get so caught up on trying to, beat everybody else and have the best residency that they can, but don't really take into effect or take into thought, what the time constraints would be and what your social life would be and all those different things that you never really think about. And you come back and may smack you in the head later on in life, So I'll leave it at that.
Yes.
Well, Dr. Meadows, I want you to finish this sentence for me. It's a sentence that I present to all of my guests. It's a hashtag. It's I'm not just a doc. And some of my guests have answered so many different various answers. Some people say doctorpreneur. Some people say world traveler. So to you, Dr. Meadows, I present to you, I'm not just a doc. I'm a
loving husband and devoted father.
That's what's up. I love it. I love it. Excellent answer. Well, Dr. Meadows, I want to say thank you very much for being on the show. I know you got a busy schedule, and I really appreciate you dropping knowledge on this show. I think the audience is definitely going to learn a lot from what you have to offer. So
well, absolutely. And I just encourage folks, if they want to learn more about all of this stuff, to go over to alternativefinancialmedicine.com. They can get a sample chapter of the book by signing up to my email list. And we've got several interviews with heads of various online platforms where you can hear from the folks themselves that run these businesses, how it works and what to expect.
We'll drop that in the show notes. Dr. Meadows, thanks for being on the show. We got to do it again, man.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for being on the show. And that's a wrap. Man, Dr. Meadows is lucky I don't have that picture of him rocking a Gumby. But I really, really enjoyed this podcast. I hope you all enjoyed this episode. This was a really good one. You never know. I think it's something to listen to. It's something to really take heed to. And I think no matter how diversified you are, it's always important to understand all the different options that are available to you. As you already know, with me on my previous episodes, I am a huge fan of passive investing with index funds. But also at the same time, I'm a big proponent of being as diversified as possible. So, me, myself, I may take a listen to what he has to say. I may take a look at the book and see if there's something else that I may need to get into. I've always been interested in real estate investing. I may be interested in maybe some of the other alternative assets that he may be talking about. So you guys may want to take a look at that also, with the caveat, please make sure you talk to a professional financial advisor before you go ahead and do so, okay? Please, if you want to learn more about Dr. Kenyon Meadows, be sure to check him out at alternativefinancialmedicine.com. And his book is called Alternative Financial Medicine, High Yield Investing in Low Yield World. Link will be in the show notes. Remember, y'all, if you enjoyed this episode, go ahead and show some love. Share this episode with other people who aren't listening to the show, with other people who would benefit from this show. And you know what? Go ahead and tweet it out also. I would really, really appreciate it, though. What I would really, really want is if you can go ahead and, after the show, go ahead and leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. Once again, that really helps the show to grow. As the show moves up the rankings, it's that much easier for more listeners and more followers to get a hold of the show and listen, as well as it makes it easier to get more guests. And look, listen, I'm going to catch you on the next episode. But before we jet, remember, we only got one life. Let's make it count and live outside the box. Peace.